Leadership series for this day. Happy St. Patrick's Day to everybody. Before we get started, I have to do a few administrative things first. So first of all, talk about our sponsor, the law firm of Hull & Chandler. So Hull & Chandler, PA, is a client-centered law firm providing legal services to individuals, families, businesses, and nonprofits in Charlotte, North Carolina, and throughout the Carolinas. Our award-winning attorneys help our clients solve real-world problems and provide real-world value. On any given day, you can find our firm's attorneys helping entrepreneurs start businesses from scratch or counseling them on buying an existing business, serving as fractional general counsel to a nonprofit, reviewing contracts and ensuring compliance with regulators, helping families plan their estates to ensure their loved ones are taken care of after their time on earth is through, protecting the rights of individuals and families who have been victims in auto accidents, and litigating in court to protect a business who hasn't been paid what has been agreed upon in a contract. If you're interested in learning more about how our attorneys can help you solve your real-world problems, visit our website at www.hullandchandler.com and schedule a consultation with one of our award-winning attorneys. The law firm of Hull & Chandler is proud to sponsor the Leadership Series, a program where Hull & Chandler attorney Rocky Cabagnot interviews local and regional leaders in the nonprofit, private, and public sectors to discuss the real-world interplay of law, business, and social dynamics within the context of our continuously changing times. I am your host, Rocky Cabagnot. I help nonprofits stay legally compliant and avoid legal problems by providing both subscription-based and fractional general counsel services. As a former executive director of a multi-million-dollar public charity, I designed these legal service programs go beyond the billable hour to better meet the legal needs that nonprofits face on a daily basis. I've been serving the nonprofit sector in some form or fashion since I started out as a legal service attorney out of law school almost 20 years ago. So let's get started. So again, as I stated, happy St. Patrick's Day, everybody. And so let's get into our topic. So what is social good? The website Social Change Central says, quote, social good is typically defined as an action that provides some sort of benefit to the general public. In this case, fresh water, education, and healthcare are all good examples of social goods. One of the major reasons that the Internal Revenue Service allows organizations to become tax exempt as 501c3 public charities is because these tax exempt organizations provide social goods, or as legal authorities state, quote unquote, reduce the burdens upon government. The private sector, or for a shorthand, the business community, has traditionally got involved in the provision of social goods by providing financial support to 501c3 public charities, such as direct grants of money, or by entering into commercial co-venture with public charities, such as when your favorite restaurant promises to donate every beer sold during a given week to a particular charity. Today, we're going to talk about whether it is time we started to revision the traditional paradigm of the business community providing charity to nonprofits in order for nonprofits to provide social goods. In a sense, today's discussion will be about whether we can, quote, rewire social good here in Charlotte and beyond. To help us navigate this discussion and discuss the forthcoming Charlotte-Mecklenburg Social Good Report is Josh Jacobson, Managing Director of Next Stage. Josh brings deep experience in organizational development with Next Stage, a strategy and implementation firm based in Charlotte, North Carolina, that serves nonprofit organizations and social cause startups throughout the Carolinas. Next Stage provides organizations access to affordable, high-quality consulting services to quote-unquote help them get to the next level. Josh specializes in strategic positioning and tactical design, helping nonprofits and social cause businesses develop their platforms and tools necessary to support effective operations and fund development activities. Josh is an expert in strategic business planning, annual capital development activities, earned revenue market assessment and implementation, executive development search, case strategy, prospect research, grant writing, data flow analysis. I could go, the list goes on and on. So without further ado, let's welcome Josh Jacobson to the Leadership Series.
Hey, Rocky, thank you. Thanks, glad to be here. And anytime my bio is read, I'm always,
I always look at everyone's LinkedIn. That's how, and I bring somebody in here, I got it. And yeah, it's very impressive. So you want to check out Josh and what his organization can do, but we'll definitely get into that. So actually, maybe that's our first question.
Sure.
Maybe Josh, because maybe some of the folks might know you, some of the folks may not be, maybe new to you and or Next Stage. Why don't you tell us a little bit about how you got into the nonprofit sector and how it led you to starting Next Stage in the first place?
Yeah, thanks, Rocky. So I moved to this area in 2008 from New York City, where I was working for a nonprofit organization, Broadway producing theater company called Manhattan Theater Club. I'd worked at the Juilliard School before that, really come up through the cultural arts sector, and relocated here in 2008, just as the recession was beginning to take hold, and found myself in kind of a quandary, to whether or not to continue my identity as a practitioner for nonprofits, working for nonprofits, or to maybe explore this space of consulting that I was familiar with but wasn't entirely sure was for me. In this community in Charlotte, consulting for nonprofits really was a fairly nascent concept. We had capital campaign consulting during the big rise of Charlotte's social good sector in the 90s and 2000s. A lot of our major edifices, buildings, and endowments were built with major gift fundraising, and that was the majority of the consulting that was out there. But there was a need in our community for more management consulting, more of that strategy consulting, helping organizations navigate the change that was coming with post-recession. But as we'll talk about, there were a lot of changes happening around that time. It was an economic challenge for our community, but we were also dealing with generational change. The silent generation that was largely still managing a lot of corporations, and nonprofits began to hand off that responsibility to more of the boomer generation, and Gen X leaders were starting to step into leadership roles. And there was just new rules being written about how nonprofits thrive in the Charlotte region. And so I've been a student of it. I've worked with about 250 nonprofit organizations over my time here in Charlotte. Some of those were with other firms, but I started Next Stage at the beginning of 2014 because I felt like there was a need to kind of hang my own shingle and begin doing that work aligned to my own evaluation of who I am, and to create a business that was very value-centered. We're a social enterprise company, and that we are more than a consulting firm. We really we see ourselves the way a nonprofit sees itself: mission and vision and values and guiding principles. And we work with and through our clients to try to make Charlotte the best it can be. So that's been my journey, and it's come to this place now. I'm 7 years into the ownership of a growing business. We are a team of 5, and we're about to, as you noted, publish a big study, and it's an exciting time for us to be coming out of the pandemic and to be having some new ideas about what and how nonprofits can add value to our community.
So I know we're going to talk about how we're going to talk about rewiring things, but give us a little more explanation of sort of what the current or historical type of services Next Stage has provided to the nonprofit sector, kind of to set the stage of, well, no pun intended, about where you are now or where you've been historically, so then I can set the idea of what this potential jump in sort of change of strategy for both your organization and arguably for the sector itself.
Yeah, you got it. So, up until now, all of our clients have, or most of our clients, I'd say about 98% of our clients have been nonprofit organizations. You mentioned all the sort of areas of focus: strategic planning, strategic business planning, resource development, et cetera. We're a firm that works with organizations that are at a crossroads. And I would say we are known for the courage to consider new and different ways of doing things. I think we've been, that sort of is an expression of value of courage that we have to be examining, what most nonprofits, and I think most companies, I'm sure, folks who are tuning in right now, the temptation is to kind of keep your head down and focus on what is internal to your institution. So, the nonprofit that is a publicly held entity that's really owned by everybody and is in service to social good, it ultimately can't do that. It can't focus only on its kind of what's inside of the organization. It's set up, in fact, to be a public institution. So thinking about what are the needs in the community, what is the perspective or perception of the organization or of those needs, what might it do differently, what do the people it serve think about their own needs. That's something that really needs to be done on a regular basis. The nonprofit needs to be in conversation with the broader community. So while we champion that sort of engagement, we also know that there are demarcation points in the life cycle of a nonprofit where they're more likely to take the posture of doing a wholesale examination, what we call strategic planning, and even annual planning, where we really hit pause for a second and say, okay, can we kind of take stock and gather data and really make sure we're on the right path, that we're doing things the way we're supposed to be doing. So that's been our work across so many organizations. And what's unique about that is it gives us such a unique lens on our community. So while I've worked with small, mid-sized, large organizations, they are all touching major themes that I'm sure companies tuning in are also connected with: economic development and economic mobility and diversity and inclusion, and how we are shaping our community, land use in our community, and how to be equitable about the things that we are trying to accomplish as a city. All the things that are top of mind for a for-profit company are the backdrop for a nonprofit. So there are ways in which while we focused on social good through a 501c3 construct, we're really touching mainline themes that are big picture across the whole of the city. And because the board members, board of directors are made up of private sector leaders often, we are also interacting a lot of times with corporate professionals and business owners and entrepreneurs and people who are gathered together within the construct of the 501c3 to strive together to make a mission happen, but are also representative of the voice of their constituency. Financial services companies, the legal profession, entrepreneurship, small business, retail establishments. They're bringing all of that into the nonprofit construct. So while we haven't worked directly with business, we have certainly orbited it, and I would argue nonprofits are intermingled and intertwined already with the private sector in so many ways. So our work to date has been more nonprofit focused, but going forward, as you've teed up, we're going to be doing things a little bit differently.
Well, I think that's a great kind of like sort of a development that I think is occurring in the nonprofit and the for-profit sector. I mean, you can see, you've heard this term social entrepreneurship, right? Kind of came up in the last few years where, I think for a long time the polls were, here is a nonprofit on one end, here's a for-profit, and maybe I'll ask you a question about this traditional relationship, the charity type of relationship in a second, but there have always been sort of attempts to kind of bridge this sort of thing. I know for a little while we had something called a L3C in North Carolina for like 2 days. It seemed like that legislatively. I know that there's something called a B Corp certification, that if you are on this pole, right, you're on the for-profit, but you want to sort of at least have sort of like you said, kind of have the attributes of an organization that believes and provides social good. There is that, but and so I think that there definitely has always been, and the nonprofit sector, you're always being told you got to think like a business, right? As when I was executive, you got to keep the lights on, right? You can't just all just be goodwill and vibes. You've got to make numbers make sense. So there's always been sort of an interplay between both the for-profit and the nonprofit. And I think that what you're leading into, and the rewiring of social good, is to sort of reevaluate, this is what I'm thinking, is that relationship between both the traditional for-profit and a traditional nonprofit. And so maybe I'd ask you a question as a kind of, maybe to the audience, explain what has been the traditional, I guess, relationship between both for-profit and nonprofit when it comes to social good. So maybe we can set the stage about where we are currently. How do these two players play with each other today?
Well, and there's a lot of thinking out there that nonprofits kind of did a disservice to themselves by classifying themselves as nonprofit. So really looking at for-profit and nonprofit, how they're defined is about who profits and what and what is profit. It doesn't mean that what our 501c3 organizations can have earned revenue strategies or ways in which they're providing value in return for service. It just means that there's a sort of differentiation between the for-profit private sector company that is set up with an idea of making profit for ownership, whoever may own it, whether that's a single person or a publicly held company, that it is designed to create profit, and nonprofits which are not designed to create profit. But that says nothing about revenue development. It says nothing about how the strategies that might be employed by a nonprofit. And you mentioned kind of social enterprise as being, or social entrepreneurship companies as being kind of a new rise. The idea of a for-profit company that's privately held, but that is set up with an intent to enrich the community, to improve the community for a social good outcome. So it looks a lot like a nonprofit organization. It just isn't publicly held. There's no board of directors. It also can't provide charitable deduction for contributions, which is really, we want to think about what's the secret sauce or secret superpower of the 501c3 construct. It's that it can receive donations from individuals and then provide a tax deductibility back to that individual. So when they submit their taxes to the IRS, they can claim that those contributions should count towards how taxes are levied against them. So that's the clear differentiation. Other than that, they are both business models. They are both have revenue and expense. They both have products or services that are provided. They're more alike than different. Really, the 501c3, it's just a tax identification. It's a classification of how profit is treated by that entity, but it shouldn't and doesn't govern how we think of them or how they operate. But they have classically lived in different spaces. So we tend to think of a private sector company as being focused on generating profit for an owner and creating a value proposition in the community, that there's an exchange of revenue for services or product. There's a margin on that, and the margin is profit. So what it costs the company to make the product or service versus what people are willing to pay for it. The difference between that is the margin that creates profit. On the nonprofit side, we've tended to think of nonprofits as having programming that serves its mission. Nonprofits have a mission statement that speaks to why they are tax deductible, why they are a charitable enterprise. The IRS, in theory, is serving as a clearinghouse of deciding, although I think, Rocky, as you and I both know, the IRS isn't a great arbiter on who should be a nonprofit or not. It's not like when you file your nonprofit status, they're basically making sure you filed the paperwork correctly. They're not coming and evaluating, what is the need in your community? Should you be a nonprofit? So it's kind of unique that way, that we have essentially entrepreneurs who can start and create a publicly held entity on their own, so long as they have some board members and a stated mission. The idea of, there are many 501c3s that are founded that way. But once they're established, that organization has an expectation of making the world a better place in some way, and that the dollars that are taken in, that no one person is profiting, that instead the assets, the profit is held as an asset of that nonprofit for the investment in the mission of that organization. How that looks on a day-to-day basis is we tend to think of nonprofits as virtuous, as doing things that are deserving of contributions. We probably think that nonprofits are primarily funded by our charitable contributions, although that's not true. In fact, private investment in nonprofits is a relatively small percentage of their overall business model. Macro private donations are a smaller. They are more likely to be engaged with the public sector, so government contracts. They're as likely to have earned revenue. So when you think of Goodwill locally, that has a thrift shop that you donate your goods, they sell them, they make up a margin on that, and that gets funneled into their business model. The YMCA that has gyms where you pay a membership, a a theater company or an opera that has ticket sales. Those are all nonprofits that have found an earned revenue strategy to sustain themselves. And earned revenue is a big part, actually, of the nonprofit construct. Organizations that are entirely charitably funded are often encouraged to differentiate and diversify their revenue streams. So whereas we have social enterprise companies, kind of, if to use your, you have the companies on this side and we have nonprofits on this side, social enterprise moved a little closer to the nonprofit. We want to be a privately held company that makes a positive impact on the world. And nonprofits have been moving more towards earned revenue strategies of saying we really need to be mitigating what could be, pardon the pun, a rocky economy. So if we had, a reason why donors might not contribute is because they are, impacted in some way, that's going to hurt the business model for that nonprofit. Earned revenue tends not to be as dependent upon the largesse of the person contributing it. There's a value return. I'm a member of my YMCA because it's the best gym in town. That it also is driving the mission of the organization is maybe secondary in my mind to the fact that I actually want to be a gym member at my YMCA, or I want to buy the baked goods of an organization that like Community Matters Cafe, which supports the Charlotte Rescue Mission. I want to eat someplace where the benefit is back to a social good outcome. So we've moved closer to this kind of middle point, which is to say we're more alike than different. But there are still some kind of tropes in our minds that we probably have to overcome so that we can get away from this notion that there's the profit-making companies and these charities. The charity mindset we talk about is that nonprofits are thought of as charities, as benefits, and that they would have earned revenue strategies or would compete in an economy with a for-profit company. That's not really something that we're thinking about or willing to go there often. We want to think of them as
talk a bit more about the charity aspect and going back to the polls of thinking how the for-profit thinks about the nonprofit, right? Obviously we've talked about the sort of more, I guess, innovative firms, such as we call the social entrepreneurship, even the B Corp, like an REI or something like that, is moving towards the more social good platform. But it does seem that, at least from a rhetorical and to some extent also just a substantive standpoint, many of your traditional Fortune 500 type companies are, at least to whatever extent they can, or at least whatever extent they are being counseled or consulted with, are starting to at least put out the language of, say, diversity, inclusion, equity. They are many times putting their money in places that, had not necessarily been traditional for the Fortune 500 companies and such. And so when we're talking about necessarily rewiring the notion of social good, it's, I guess, and maybe you can correct me, is that there at least has been a traditional view of the for-profit sector. Is like, we have a budget for charity, right? So you go into the budget, you have your comptroller or whatever is there. And so when the charities come asking, right, they get, they come and they send their executive director over, they talk to whoever their social responsibility manager, community, manager is, and they kind of have a discussion and they look at their budget. But it's a one line, and it's usually a charitable giving line in their budget. And so they look at that, and when that's all gone, then they can't give any more charitable giving. And from what I understand is that is a traditional way of looking, but if we are to rewire it, that these contributions to, or these partnership dollars maybe, or these service dollars or something, would be less looked at as coming from a charitable donation budget line, but actually through various lines in the business adding value. And so I think that's where the radical notion of what rewiring social good is coming from. So I know there's a lot to unpack there, but I kind of wanted to open that to kind of move that discussion in there, because I think what you've been talking about, what we've been reading in this report that you're going to bring out, is that there is an overhaul different way particularly for your, and again, maybe these labels are going to have no meaning after after a few years, about the nonprofits versus the for-profits, at least in our regular parlance. Obviously IRS is going to have a very very important view of that, but So I guess like if I'm in the Fortune 500, and I'll ask you about it if a smaller business, but if I'm sitting, in that C-suite, and I want to definitely, I'm definitely all into, CSR, and I'm into, all of that. But I tend to look at, I tend to look at charitable organizations, maybe, like I said, a commercial co-venture. Like, okay, well, if you come to our Hardee's, every, milkshake we sell will go to your charity or something. It's still very much a we are helping you, and maybe we'll get some good, maybe we'll just get some good PR out of this, and maybe we'll get a tax deduction or a business expense deduction or something of that nature. But what you're saying is that for-profit business could actually benefit more on a bottom line aspect, just as much as almost a PR aspect. Would that be a fair assessment of kind of where you're going with this discussion?
Yeah. Thanks, Rocky. So I think to go back to where we were, the sort of company charity mindset and the large company, the exchange between those two have been often rooted in what you described, the sort of what I would almost call a slush fund, inside the corporation. And we tended to find this more with companies that have some sort of exposure to either a customer or to an investor. So when we have business to consumer companies, that is more often where you see, in our own uptown, Bank of America or Duke Energy, a Wells Fargo, companies that have an exposure to a retail or service customer, or if there's an investor, someone who has owned shares in that company. There's this notion of we want to be a good corporate citizen, and that's defined by passing some arbitrary and not written down rules about what it means to be a corporate citizen, an entity. Our country treats corporations as citizens. We think of them as just as you and I would if someone were to expose us to the broader community. How are we living? Are we recycling? Are we donating to nonprofit organizations? Are we volunteering? Rocky, do you and I get up on Saturday morning and go pick up trash, along the side of the road? Is that something that we are doing? Because to be a good citizen is not only to live and earn money in a community, but to actually be a part of that community. And so there's been these kind of rules, unwritten, but rules that govern very large organizations and often what we consider as corporations around sort of how they should be. And even privately held businesses, often because they're vendors to those companies, they get sort of drafted into some amount of social good because they're being asked to do it by those corporations that have some exposure to a public. And so we have these funds that are not very tied to outcomes, not really tied to a KPI of some sort, some measurable way in which it's advancing the company. It's an understood and believed to be important, maybe to a key relationship or to a key constituency. But it's not the way every other aspect of, companies have gotten to a very, data-driven world. And so every other aspect of a company is under the microscope to find efficiency and effectiveness. And yet there's been this part of the company where there's been very little sort of governing the decision-making about how dollars are contributed. On the other side, nonprofits see how the company talks about itself, because often talking about and putting out a message of being a good corporate citizen suggests that Bank of America cares about literacy because it's funding literacy projects and it's chosen literacy as a signature piece. So as a nonprofit, you would think, I'm going to come and pitch that I'm the best literacy organization in town, that if you are funding literacy, you should fund us because look at our outcomes.
Right.
Here's our data suggesting that we are the best literacy organization. But at the end of the day, Bank of America really is not set up to fund literacy. That's not its mission. Its mission is to make money as a banking institution, as a fiduciary. It's all the people that work there are people who are, motivated by a shared goal of profit making for shareholder wealth. And yet we as nonprofits are coming into these constructs and asking for a gift or a grant or a sponsorship as if the value that's being exchanged is ultimately our virtuousness as a nonprofit, that the goodness that we're making. And so what we're saying is that we need to kind of rethink this. You know, the why of both of these organizations is got to be put on the table, because the what and the how is broken. You know, there was a good old days of Charlotte pre-recession. You know, what we tend to consider the reign of the CEO leader in our community, where CEOs were really doing top-down culture building and city forming. And in that context, we had leadership from the corporate sector that was saying, we are doing this because we believe it's right. And because there is a importance that we show who we are to the world. You know, we want to be a world-class city, and a world-class city has great art organizations and has limited homelessness, and you know, is thinking in these ways. And so it was this sort of culture of taking care of people because it's the right thing to do. And it has its rootedness back in probably 1950 Charlotte, right? Where the top leaders, the top business leaders were seeing each other at pews in churches. And you wanted to be a good citizen because you were seeing your peer on Sunday morning, and you wanted to demonstrate your humanity and maybe your faith journey through how you treated the world, that there was a trade-off of being very profitable is also comes with an expectation that we also are taking care of the less fortunate. And that evolved over time into Charlotte being this, you know, growing world-class city led by, you know, clear leadership from the silent generation, that World War II generation, the greatest generation, you know, from coming out of the Great Depression era. You know, people who really were very thankful for all the things that they were provided. They had suffered, and they had scrapped together, and as they were successful in business, they recognized how lucky they were to have made it through these things. Each successive generation is less connected to what it means to sacrifice in the way that generation had. And so it's not surprising that we had this tremendous generation sort of leading us in the 90s into the 2000s to really think about being a city that gives back. We had workplace giving happening in a lot of these companies through the United Way and Arts and Science Council. The idea being that you would self-tax yourself, that you know, what giving is ultimately a form of elective taxation. No one likes to think of it that way, but we're actually asking people to
redistribution of sorts.
There you go, redistribution of what I'm earning as a salary to give to an organization in lieu of taxes, instead of the government taking that money from me and distributing it for that purpose. I'm choosing what's important to me and giving to that. But as we found, as we left the Great Recession and came out of that, leadership was different. We had different leaders in our community. They weren't leading in the same way. That sort of strong arm, top down mentality, what we call a paternal or maternal instinct around kind of taking care of our community. We had all these kind of new rules, and they were not, there was nothing written down about how to do that effectively. And what we started to see was companies starting to make inroads towards, you know, this budget that we have, this slush fund, you know, what are we doing with it? Like, why does it exist? And one of the clear places to focus would be on marketing, cause marketing and brand development. You know, how are we getting value back? And so we, you know, nonprofits have been doing this for a long time. You know, if you're sponsoring my event, your logo gets up on the wall, you're getting in the, you know, as if that logo on the back of a shirt. That's right. Yeah. The gold circle, the silver circle, as if these things really were aligned to value. I mean, at the end of the day, there's no way, if I'm having an event for 100 people, there's no way I can provide enough value for a $10,000 sponsorship. You know, 100 people, we would be saying, you know, we're charging $100 a head, you know, for your company to get brand exposure to these folks. So I would have to be a company that makes a widget that only these 100 people are buying. And it would have to be a pretty valuable widget to be charging you $100 to get any sort of exposure to these people. So the construct of it was always off to begin with. You know, and that's why there's been little evaluation, because if a company really looked at it, they'd say, gosh, what are we doing here? There's the value we're getting in return. It's just it's hard for me to stack this up against, you know, other decisions we're making about how we allocate funds. But my question is that the way it has to be? And I think that's the question that we've put on the table for our community, is that, is there a value proposition that engaging with nonprofits could be more valuable to you? Maybe not the same way that you would think about investing in other aspects of your company, but certainly a stronger value proposition than is currently being thought about. But to make that happen, we would need to do two things. First, we'd need to reprogram how companies think of nonprofits, because right now they think of them as charities. They think of them as like children. You know, it'd be like a child. Yeah, Rocky, if your child came into the room and said, "Dad, I want to talk to you about making an investment in my lemonade stand. Now, before you kick me out, hear me out. My lemonade stand is going to see this many people a day," and you would say, "That is cute. You know, I'm gonna listen to this, but am I really thinking in my mind that this is an investment opportunity? Probably not."
Yeah.
That's a little bit of what it seems like when a nonprofit comes into the room of a corporate leader and says, "Hey, there's value we could provide to you. You got to hear us out, because you're thinking of us as a charity, as a child, but you need to see us as a vendor. You need to see us as something that you need to have rather than a nice to have." On the other side, nonprofits need to stop going into companies and making asks, you know, disconnected from what is the lever I'm pulling inside that company. I shouldn't go in and pitch literacy. I should be pitching how funding our organization will help with cause marketing, or help with employee engagement, or help with, you know, something that's actually a rooted, you know, business concept inside that company. So we would need both sides to kind of see each other differently, to create an exchange. And that's the rewiring we're talking about, is to get people out of the mentality of a giving, you know, a charitable relationship between these two entities, and instead to see them as interrelated, as partners, and as a vendor to the other.
So this sounds like, I mean, from what I'm hearing, you know, is that this is a well, let's just say what it is, a true paradigm shift in how the relationship between the quote unquote funder and the quote unquote awardee, you know, we have a lot of terms, right? We have so much labels, so many labels, and it frames how we think about the relationship between the entities, right? It's you know, if it's, you know, because if it was just a vendor coming in to meet with whatever, you know, I saw many vendors when I was running a nonprofit, right? You see vendors, and you always want, but, you know, I always thought the best vendors are the ones who kind of operate more like partners with me, you know, or almost teammates in many respects. You know, those are the best vendors, you know, like, you know, if my insurance broker knows more about insurance than I do, you know, and that they, you know, if they can tell me what are the best rates and should we go to a self-funded healthcare plan or not, you know, these sort of, they provide value beyond just being, obviously not a charity, right? You don't look at your vendor as a charity, right? That's, you know, you're leasing copiers. I'm not trying to, you know, see what Canon does with all of this here. That's not a charitable relationship. It is a vendor one, but it sounds like from what you're saying is that the paradigm shift is that nonprofits should enter into these Fortune 500 or any business. I mean, I know we're in Charlotte, uptown Charlotte, and there's a lot of that sort of energy there, but looking at it as not just the ask, because that's what I remember when I started off as executive director, is like, got to know what your elevator speech is. You need to be able to say it in 30 seconds or less. You need to know your mantra, basically, wherever you are, and you got to make the ask. You know, if my administrative assistant said, "Where are you going?" "I'm going to make some asks." You know, that would be my response, right? I'm going ask chasing. Right? I mean, I don't know if that sounds terrible, but you know, but you know, but then on the other end, you know, it's sort of like, well, okay, here comes the nonprofit. They're going to be asking, and well, do we have it in our budget from our ask budget? You know, and so what you're asking is that there is that if we rewire this relationship, then the nonprofit becomes more of a partner, a vendor partner, or a social good partner with the tradition. Just becomes a partner, and we have to get away from the labels. And so I guess this discussion is kind of what led up to, and correct me, with the social good report that Next Stage has been researching and developing, right? Because all these discussions have got to find themselves, be able to communicate this. It's got to go beyond just you and I sitting here talking on a Zoom. It's got to find itself in some sort of concrete fashion. So talk a little bit about this report.
Yeah, thank you. And I've been stumping for this for a long time. So my first presentation on this subject was 5 years ago in 2016 for as you can imagine, a group of nonprofits. And the challenge I found is that, you know, my work has often been through the context of representing a nonprofit. Even when we're engaging with a company or a corporate leader, they're still seeing me as an agent of a nonprofit that's hired me to do that work. And so we realized if we really want to see this paradigm shift, we really need to be unencumbered from anybody paying us. This needs to be something that we're doing from a thought leadership standpoint.
Gotcha.
So we're actually launching this year our first social good report, which will be an annual report. It won't always be about the intersection between companies and nonprofits. It'll have a different theme each year, but this year the subtitle is Profit and Purpose, and it's about examining this intersectionality between the nonprofit and for-profit business models. The thing is, it's not like this is so revolutionary, because it's already happening and has been happening for a long, long time. It's just no one has put a spotlight on it. So what we've been seeking to do through interviews and surveying and focus groups is to do what we do with nonprofits. You know, as a consulting firm, discovery is a big part of what we do. We create an assessment based on research that we do. We're doing research for our community, and we're going to publish that as a study this May. And that study will unveil 10 different areas of intersectionality that we've uncovered through our research, as well as case studies of organizations and companies that have been doing it effectively for a long, long time. I can pull forward one that probably is well familiar to all of you, Habitat for Humanity. So Habitat is an organization locally that builds homes, affordable homes for people in low-income communities. And they have had a relationship with many, many companies through volunteerism. And this is probably the way most companies have begun to step a toe into getting some sort of value proposition back from the organizations that they engage with, is through how they help their employees get involved in volunteerism. And we might think of that as, oh gosh, that's more giving from the company. They're giving human resources out to the community. But what the company knows, and we all have studied now, is how important volunteerism and engagement in community is for employee satisfaction. That we're more likely to keep employees when a company encourages them to be community connected. And so that idea of volunteerism is both a marketing opportunity. You know, when we see Wells Fargo Day of Caring and everyone's wearing their Wells Fargo shirts as they go out in to do a day of service in the community. Right. That's a relational marketing for Wells Fargo. Their employees are having a good experience. That's employee retention strategy. And ultimately the organization benefits because they're typically being compensated for that. Right. In fact, this was the big sea shift that was made, and there's some great local companies that actually led the way that said we should be paying nonprofits for taking our volunteers. Rather than see that as a contribution of human labor, we need to see that they're actually project managing something that has a great bottom line benefit to our company of employee satisfaction. And so now most organizations charge, you know, if you have 10 nonprofit and 10 of your employees going out to engage in a 4-hour service project, there's now math that can be used to figure out what's the cost of that and what the company should pay the nonprofit in order to provide that service. Habitat for Humanity has been doing this for a long, long time. Right. In fact, Habitat is embedded in people's budgets. And inside a company like Bank of America, there may be 25 different budgets, different teams that send out a team for team building. Because in building a house together, there's also a lot that's learned about how to work together and collaboratively in a different context. And so that you know, accounting team gets sent out to do a day of service where they're building a house together. They come back having built camaraderie, having built connection. They understand each other better. That's now a part of team building, like trust fall exercises and corporate picnics. It's embedded now into that budget. So our proposition is, what would happen if we were able to bring more of that embeddedness? So that we weren't going through that person who's, as you mentioned, the corporate social responsibility executive. And that's somebody who has that budget, but it's a relatively small budget. It's the budget we carve out of the company for social good, but not connected back to these benefits. In reality, there's also budgets throughout the company that are you know, related to a specific vertical of business, or you know, living as an expression of HR or of marketing. What if we could knit together all of those budgets? What if, as a nonprofit, you could go in and get all of those people in a room? So I want the social responsibility person there, but I also want the HR lead. I want to get if there is someone who's focused on workplace and culture and values, I want to bring them forward. I want to bring the marketing team forward, the public relations team, and I want them all in a room because they don't ever come into a room together. You would think these guys see each other often. They don't. They live in silos inside that company. And we want to bring them together and say, in this one relationship with this nonprofit, with Habitat, you could be served in a number of different ways. And while you each maybe have modest amount of budget, together, collectively, you have a lot of budget. And if this nonprofit could actually service your organization and be counted on as a vendor to provide employee engagement, et cetera, the cost of that to the nonprofit is going to be less than you're paying them to do. And the margin there is driving the mission. And so it's another way of looking at profitability through that exchange is driving mission.
I'll say this, I think that from the nonprofit side, like when I was an ED, I was looking for the corporate social responsibility person because I figured, I can get in there, I'll make a pitch, talk about how many early childhood things we're doing with our Head Start program, things of that nature. But this opens the field, right? Because obviously from the for-profit viewpoint, there's if I'm an HR director and you're saying I can get more retention, particularly with this newer generation, turnover, particularly I would imagine that you've got a lot of large banking institutions in this city and people probably just change, not every day, but the ability of fluidity between positions among these should be relative. So you've got to, you from an HR perspective, you put a lot of money into some entry-level person, professional development, and then they get up to a certain point where they walk right out the door to the bank next door or something. What you're saying is that because of it sounds like the dynamics, particularly the characterization, you said, well, obviously there's a generation shift, but we have a whole new generation of workers that what they value in a workplace is probably a little different than what it was with the silent generation and the
big time. That's been actually the big disruption here is about next gen workforce. So, for all the conversation about how millennials have been disruptive to our, corporate constructs,
right?
we now embrace that. In fact, we can't fight it. That these generations are wired differently themselves than previous generations, and so the idea that your teams, your employees are demanding some way in which their personal values are showing up in their workplace, that they want to be value aligned with the company they work for. And that value alignment would include how that shows up in community because they want it to, that's really willing this into being for a lot of companies. So if previously, social good lived as mostly an expression of marketing and branding, and it was about kind of cause marketing, that still exists, but we're now adding employee engagement and workplace culture into the mix. And those are far more powerful, much bigger budgets. At the end of the day, this is a huge, expense for companies when they lose employees. The cost of replacing a mid-level employee is $40,000 every time it happens. And so if they can retain their employees longer, keep people, and a lot of the data is showing that these younger generations actually are not what we think of them as hopping around. The reason they're hopping around is they're looking for that values alignment. When they find it, they're far more likely to stay. In fact, I had someone who I interviewed tell me that the millennial is more like the 50s generation than like some disruptive generation. They actually are looking and craving a place where they can find long-term satisfaction. It's just they have trouble finding it in these top-down paradigms. But you're exactly right. If we could encourage people to see that the employee driver on this is a critical piece, well, that's a much more measurable thing too. It's hard for me to measure what is the value of your sponsorship of our luncheon that had, a couple hundred people. How do I show marketing benefit there? How many eyeballs got on it? In a spreadsheet world that thinks of cost per thousand viewed, this is how am I going to compete there? But where I can compete is on employee satisfaction, on employee recruitment and retention, on things like wellness. This is becoming a big corporate wellness in this year of COVID. As we think about the emotional well-being of our teams, we're all on Zoom all the time and we're feeling drained. I have someone who I've interviewed who talked about the nonprofit engagement as a wellness strategy. That actually you're more emotionally and socially connected through that activity. What if we were to kind of transform how the nonprofit can be a broker of these sorts of positive, well-being oriented concepts. Right now, diversity, equity, inclusion, after the year that we experienced in 2020, the fight for racial justice, that's so forward, is a #1 topic in front of all these companies. And what's important about this is how it changes also who engages with nonprofits, because to date we've had primarily business to consumer, large corporations that are publicly held. That tends to be where most of the dollars are coming from.
Right.
And our provocative concept is that there are 40,000 plus companies in Mecklenburg County. What if we could get many more of them to engage with social good in this way? Think about all the corporate parks throughout our community. Think of all the small, mid-sized businesses, 500, 1,000 employees, manufacturing that we don't know anything about. What do they care about? If I sell widgets in Asia, what do I care about social good in Charlotte? Well, if my workforce thinks it's important,
right,
then I'm going to care about it. And that's going to change, the whole game, and creates huge opportunities for nonprofits. But first we have to get people seeing each other differently.
Yeah.
And then we have to go in with a problem-solving services mentality. The company needs to be able to share with the nonprofit, here are my challenges. To the world, we might want to project that we're donating to your nonprofit and we're doing it because we're nice guys and gals. That's what we want the world to know. But behind closed doors, let's talk about the fact that we have a merger between 3 companies, and our workplace right now is a mess. We have teams that don't believe in each other or don't like each other. And we've tried everything. We've tried trust fall exercises. We've tried, compensating people. We've tried everything. Could a nonprofit come in and help us in some way by creating what's becoming more inside the company engagement? The volunteerism is good. It sends someone out into the world to do good. But what about workplace activation? What about that nonprofit coming in and doing lunch and learns and lobby level engagement of employees as they come in? Are there ways that we might take a newly integrated, merged company, or a company that has had some form of challenge around community perception? Could we help an organization that has a real challenge of wellness? Our blue collar workforce, 80% of them smoke cigarettes. How could we help improve the health of the people that work for us through engagement with a cancer charity? Could that help us mediate something that's actually a pain point inside our organization, or an opportunity? There's this under-leveraged component of ourselves, that we are such a young workforce, or that we have so many families in our workforce. What would we do with that if we were to think of that differently? And similarly, nonprofits have to go in with a solutions mentality. We have to go in as nonprofits and not go there pitching our wares, but listening and asking questions. Tell me more about your company. What are the needs of your company? And to reframe the context. If a mid-sized manufacturing company in a corporate park in Charlotte is going to build a relationship with a nonprofit organization, to start with an idea that there's an exchange that makes sense. That may also be because someone loves literacy or loves, cancer-serving nonprofits. It might be because that company is going through a challenge that, brings it forward. Whatever that catalyst is, what's going to maintain it and build a long-lasting relationship is when we, on both sides, feel well served. And that's true of anything, right? I mean, that's that's why we get married. That's why, the sort of interrelationships we have in our lives, our friends, is because we're being mutually benefited. And that's something that just has not been on the table. And so nonprofits fight to get, sponsorship dollars and contributions from companies, and a board member has helped to leverage that and make that happen. And then the board member leaves, and then the dollars leaves. And here we've spent all this time fostering relationship, and it disappears. What if we had more of a mutualism between those two things? That rewiring is about saying that there's actually an exchange, and one that we can measure, and one that we can champion internally. Recognize we don't want to say to the world, I'm a company, and the reason I'm supporting social good is because it enriches our company. Like, no one wants to say that.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, why I might continue building that relationship is probably because of things that are mutual. And if we can get people on the same page with that, then we think that there's a lot more revenue that could be coming the way of nonprofits, and we could be improving the profitability of the companies locally.
Well, I think that's definite. I mean, I think that this is a really important discussion, because this is one of these things that, again, I think has radical ramifications for how quote unquote charity. Maybe the word charity should be actually like discussed a little bit more.
I want to get rid of charity. I want to get rid of nonprofit. I want to like reterm all these things.
Yeah, no, I mean, this
why
is
we talk about social good, because social
yeah,
good really is something that encompasses much more than the 501c3.
Something that I think is the essence of the leadership series, that we're definitely looking for leadership, because there is a crying for change in these different aspects. I could say that definitely, if the paradigm is changed, and I'm an executive director, or I'm a resource developer for whatever nonprofit, I'm not just making a beeline to whoever the corporate social responsibility person is. Like you said, you want that room full of the HR person and the marketing people and whoever, a culture and other type of officers, that the nonprofit is not just a repository for your charitable contributions, that there can actually be real tangible benefits, So from an HR perspective, like I said, when I ran the agency, we had an EAP, right? We had something here, go to the EAP, because they could talk to them. They might have some like 30 minutes free with a lawyer or something of that nature. But I think this is a thing where it's a lot more of a organic type of relationship that, again, I think we had said that in a previous conversation, almost like the old movie Jerry Maguire, where Jerry Maguire is pleading with Cuba Gooding's character, help me help you. And so in many respects, the nonprofit coming in with an ask may very well be asking, dear company, help me help you. What are your needs, and how can we help you meet those needs, right? And beyond just sort of, well, you can get a charitable tax deduction. I mean, we know that. We can put that to the side, but what are some other things here? And Josh, I got to say, we are coming right at the end of the hour here. This has been, I really feel like there should be a part 2 to this. I think that particularly after the report is released. So when is the report? When can we be on the lookout for the report, and how can we get it?
Yeah, the goal is to get that out in mid-May. So we have a current date of May 24th for the release of that report. You can go to our website, nextstage-consulting.com, and there's a sign up to receive this report. And ultimately, we're going to be talking about it for the rest of the year. So we would love to come back and share some of those findings and some more of those case studies.
This is, again, I think that, what I say, the journey of 1,000 miles starts with the first step. And I think that this is a very, I think it's almost like Medicaid transformation that's going on in the social service field, where nonprofits could get paid by Medicaid is kind of a, whoa, that's a big kind of, exactly. I mean, here's an idea where nonprofits have more tools in their as far as sustainability of the nonprofit and changing, sort of that sort of lack mentality, like we need money versus what can we give to them, and how can they get a tangible return for these partners of ours. And I think this is, I mean, in many respects, it's like learning a new language, So I think a lot of times I'm sort of stumbling over myself because I'm using dated language to be able to fit this paradigm. And I think many of us are going to have to kind of do our own sort of linguistic adjustments for this paradigm to shift and to take place. And so, Josh, I'd just like to thank. I mean, normally we have a lot of time for questions, but I think maybe.
Rocky, we do have a question in the chat. If Bruce wants to jump in real quick and
let's do that.
Ask it. Bruce, you want to ask your question?
Yeah, I think I saw it, Bruce. Thanks for. I think there's a question about how to draw more board members in who may have wealth and ability to give and broker relationships. And, I think a lot of times the challenge right now is that we were leveraging only board member relationships, meaning, the big heavy lift for a board member is that you have to go into an exchange that I've described, this traditional way of thinking, whether that's with another person, individual giver or a sponsor. And what we're trying to do is actually change the landscape a bit to make it actually easier. If there's a good, strong value proposition, self-interest, driven value proposition that I can bring, I find board members are far more willing to step into those roles. We're also easier to draw in board members because they're not they don't consider this potentially having to twist arms to get people, involved. It becomes savvy and becomes strategic. So a lot of what we've talked about today is, when we talk about sort of drawing a wealthy board, what we really want is a well-connected board. What we want is not necessarily people who only have private wealth themselves to give. That's certainly good. But if we had a board of only those people, we're probably missing opportunities to boundary span and connect to new audiences. When I sort of map the board of organizations, so often they show up in specific neighborhoods and specific companies because of how it's been relationally passed down from person to person. And what we need is to be able to boundary span to a bigger map of Charlotte. There's so much wealth in this community. So having a good strategy around how to do that, what we've described today is actually how might we create value in the nonprofit itself. It doesn't require a wealthy board member. It requires having a good, connection point to a company, someone who can open that door, certainly, but to be able to walk through that door and actually make an argument so that we're not a lemonade stand, we're a good investment. That's a bit of what we're trying to accomplish. There's certainly strategies to try to bring in, a different pedigree of board member, but I'd argue the more, particularly with next gen board members, they want to see a savvy organization. They want to see a business model that seems aligned to their worldview. And they don't want to start with an organization that has a charity mindset that's, looking to its board as the, wealthy patron of the mission. They want an organization that's of the people and is actually driving a big machine of people's interests and desire to engage with it. That's going to get the wealthy investor alongside the young entrepreneur, kind of out of bed to get more engaged.
All right. Well, yeah, we are at the hour here. We have to have a part 2, Josh. So
yes, sir.
We need to absolutely continue
Happy
this
to do it. Yep.
This will be uploaded to our YouTube channel, Hull & Chandler YouTube. So again, we're starting kind of a movement here at the Leadership Series, and in partnership with Next Stage. We're just starting a discussion here. So we'll get this uploaded, spread it around, this conversation. We'll have part 2 because there's a lot of work to be done. Because I will say this, I think it would be kind of interesting in the future where maybe nonprofits have agents that go and they talk to almost like sports and say, we'll have an exclusive relationship with this particular nonprofit, and it becomes truly a really, a truly type of beneficial relation where those social goods are going to be created out of actual returns to these businesses. And so it is truly the win-win-win, the doing good while doing well, or the classic person who actually likes to eat healthy food, right? It's good for you, but they actually like it, right? And I think that would be a great thing. So Josh, again, thank you for your time today. We will get this uploaded to our YouTube channel. And please, spread the word. We'll have a part 2 to this. And again, if you need a copy of the upcoming report, it is nextstageconsulting.com.
That's right. Yep.
All right. Until next time, please have a great week. And again, thank you for joining us here on the Leadership Series.
Bye.